Hello and welcome to the Vailrun Tapes. Every story here is true. It happened to a real person, and they wrote it down or said it out loud, so the rest of us would know. Tonight, I'll share a few of them with you. A lot of you come back here every night, and that means a lot to me. These stories stay with people. That's just what they do. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read all of them. And if you like these stories, a quick like and subscribe really help. Now get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin.
When I was around 8 or 9 years old, I started hearing a strange sound inside my head. It was not loud enough to hurt, but it was clear enough that I noticed it almost every day. The closest way I can describe it is that it sounded like a cricket chirping. It was not exactly the same as hearing a cricket outside at night. It felt closer than that, as though the sound was coming from inside one of my ears or from somewhere deep inside my head. Sometimes it seemed to be on one side. Other times, it was difficult to tell where it came from at all. It would chirp, pause, and then chirp again. At first, I thought there really was an insect nearby. I checked my bedroom for crickets. I looked beneath furniture, near the windows, and around the corners of the room. I listened carefully in other parts of the house to see whether the sound followed me. It did. I could hear it while lying in bed, sitting in another room, or going outside. That was when I began realizing the noise was not coming from the house. It was coming from me. I told my family about it. I said there was a chirping sound in my head or ear that would not stop. Because I was so young, the adults did not take it seriously at first. Children say strange things, and sometimes they have trouble explaining normal feelings. They probably thought I was hearing an insect outside, a pipe in the wall, or some small machine nearby. Someone may have suggested that my ears were ringing. But this was not a high whistle, or the soft ringing people usually describe. It sounded like a living insect making the same small noise repeatedly. No one else could hear it. That made it harder to convince them. Whenever I complained, the room seemed silent to everyone else. They could stand right beside me and hear nothing. I began wondering whether they thought I was lying. I was not trying to get attention. I did not enjoy talking about the sound. It annoyed me and sometimes frightened me, especially at night when everything else was quiet. During the day, other noises could cover it. At night, the chirping became impossible to ignore. I would lie in bed and listen. Chirp, a pause, then another chirp. Sometimes the pattern was slow, other times it seemed faster. I pressed my hands against my ears, hoping to block it. That did not work. If anything, covering my ears made it seem louder because it removed the other sounds around me. I tried sleeping on one side, then the other. I pushed my ear against the pillow. I shook my head and swallowed repeatedly, thinking pressure inside my ears might be causing it. Nothing stopped it. The sound continued for a long time. I do not remember exactly how many weeks or months passed before my mother finally listened closely. By then, I had complained so many times that she probably realized I was genuinely disturbed. One day, I told her again that the chirping was there. She came closer and pressed her ear against mine. I expected her to pull away immediately and say she heard nothing. Instead, she remained still. She listened for several seconds. I remember watching her face while she concentrated. Then, she suddenly moved away. I will never forget the way she looked. Her face had gone pale. She stared at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was not the patient look of a parent trying to calm a frightened child. She was frightened, too. She said she could hear it. For the first time, someone else had heard the noise coming from my ear. That changed everything. Until that moment, the sound could have been something only I experienced. Maybe it was a sensation inside my brain, a childhood form of ringing in the ears, or even imagination. But my mother placed her ear close to mine and heard the same chirping. It was real enough to travel outside my body. That terrified her. It terrified me too, even though part of me also felt relieved. I was not making it up. Someone finally believed me. My mother took me to the doctor that same day. I remember how urgent everything suddenly felt. Before, the noise had been treated like an annoying complaint. Now my mother wanted an explanation immediately. At the doctor's office, we described what was happening. I told him the sound was like a cricket. My mother explained that she had heard it herself by pressing her ear against mine. The doctor examined me. He looked inside my ears and checked for anything obvious. A small insect could have entered the ear canal. That may sound unlikely, but it happens. An insect moving or rubbing its wings inside an ear can create buzzing, scratching, or chirping noises. But he did not find an insect. There was no visible object. He may have checked for wax, infection, fluid, swelling, or damage to the eardrum. As far as I remember, everything looked normal. The doctor did not have an explanation. Because the sound had continued and my mother insisted she could hear it too, he arranged for me to have a scan on another day. I cannot remember whether it was a CAT scan or an MRI. I was young, and the names did not mean much to me at the time. I only understood that they were going to take pictures of the inside of my head. That made me nervous. When adults order a brain scan for a child, the child knows they are looking for something serious, even if no one says it directly. I began imagining all kinds of possibilities. Maybe there was something growing inside my head. Perhaps an insect had somehow gone deeper than the doctor could see. Maybe a small machine-like object or unusual bone movement was making the noise. Children do not always understand medicine, so the imagination fills in the missing information. The days before the appointment were frightening. The chirping continued. Now, every time I heard it, I wondered whether it was a warning from something dangerous. My mother was worried, too. She tried not to show it, but I could tell by how often she asked whether the sound was still there. She sometimes listened again by placing her ear near mine. I do not remember whether she heard it every time. The first time was enough. The scan was eventually done. I remember the medical environment more than the exact machine. Everything felt cold and serious. There were bright lights, unfamiliar equipment, and adults telling me to remain still. If it was an MRI, there would have been loud mechanical knocking and a long, enclosed space. If it was a CAT scan, the machine would have been more open and the process shorter. Either way, I remember waiting for someone to tell us what was inside my head. After the doctor received the results, he said everything looked normal. There was no tumor, no obvious damage, no strange object. Nothing in the scan explained the sound. That should have been good news. My mother was relieved that nothing dangerous had been found, but she was not satisfied. A normal scan did not explain the fact that the noise existed. It did not explain why I heard it for so long. Most importantly, it did not explain how she had heard it too. She continued pushing the doctor for an answer. She insisted that we were not describing an ordinary ringing sensation that existed only in my mind. She had physically heard a sound coming from my ear. The doctor seemed to have reached the limit of what he could offer. When the examination and scans showed nothing wrong, he suggested that both of us might be imagining it. He recommended a psychiatrist. I do not remember the exact words he used, but the message was clear. There was no medical explanation he could find, so he believed the problem might be psychological. My mother did not react well to that suggestion. From her point of view, she had heard the sound. She had not expected to hear it. She had pressed her ear against mine only because I kept complaining, then pulled away in shock. It was not something I convinced her to imagine over many hours. The chirp happened while she listened. Being told, we both imagined it felt insulting and frightening at the same time. If the doctor was right, then my mother and I had somehow shared the same false sound. If he was wrong, then something real was happening that the medical tests had failed to detect. Neither option was comforting. I do not remember whether we ever went to a psychiatrist. If we did, nothing came from it that explained the sound. The chirping continued. It followed me through the rest of childhood and into my teenage years. Over time, I became more used to it. That did not mean I liked it. I simply learned that it did not seem to be harming me. I did not become sick. My hearing did not disappear. I did not develop obvious neurological problems. The scans had been normal, and years passed without anything getting worse. The noise became part of my life. Some days I noticed it more than others. Sometimes it seemed to vanish for hours or days, then return when the surroundings became quiet. Stress may have made it stronger. Tiredness may have affected it too. I began paying attention to whether certain places, sounds, or movements changed the chirping. I wondered if it matched my heartbeat. It did not seem to. I wondered whether opening my jaw, swallowing, or moving my neck would stop it. Sometimes the sound seemed to shift, but it never gave me a clear answer. I searched for explanations as I became old enough to use the internet. One possibility was tinnitus. Tinnitus is usually described as ringing, buzzing, humming, clicking, or hissing that a person hears without an outside source. Some people hear musical tones or insect-like sounds. A cricket-like chirping could fit. But ordinary tinnitus is usually subjective, meaning only the person experiencing it can hear it. My mother had heard mine. There is another, less common form sometimes called objective tinnitus, where a real sound is produced inside the body and may be heard by another person using a stethoscope or by placing an ear close enough. That seemed closer to my experience. Certain muscle spasms inside the ear can cause clicking, fluttering, or rhythmic sounds. Blood flow near the ear can create pulsing. Movement in the middle ear muscles might make a noise that someone else could hear. Perhaps that was the answer. But the doctor had never explained it that way. Maybe the condition was rare or not obvious during the examination. If the sound did not happen while he listened, he might have had no evidence. My mother heard it because the chirping happened at exactly the right moment. The doctor may not have. Another possibility was an issue with the Eustachian tube, the small passage that helps balance pressure in the middle ear. Opening and closing movements can create clicking or crackling. But the sound I heard was regular enough to resemble a cricket, not the occasional pop people feel during a flight or cold. I also read about muscle contractions. Tiny muscles in the ear can spasm, just like an eyelid. If one contracted repeatedly, it might produce a chirping or tapping sound. That would explain why the scan looked normal. A scan captures structure, not every small movement that happens at random times. It could also explain how my mother heard it. A real mechanical sound produced by a muscle or membrane might travel through the ear canal. This is probably one of the most reasonable explanations. Still, no doctor ever confirmed it. I also came across stories about the Taos hum. The Taos hum is described as a low, distant humming sound heard by some people in certain locations. It does not sound exactly like what I experienced, but reading about it was one of the first times I learned that groups of people can hear unexplained sounds that others cannot. Some believe the hum came from industrial machines, electrical systems, or environmental vibrations. Others believed it was connected to hearing sensitivity or neurological causes. The mystery interested me because the people describing it were often told the sound was imaginary. That felt familiar. But my noise was not a low hum. It was a sharp insect-like chirp coming from my own ear. I searched for stories about crickets in the ear. Many people described tinnitus that sounded like cicadas or crickets. Some heard the sound constantly for years. That made me feel less alone. However, most of them did not say another person could hear it. That detail kept my experience outside the usual explanations. For years, I worried that the sound might return in a more serious way. I wondered whether it was the first sign of something that would appear later. Maybe the scans had been taken too early. Perhaps the condition was developing slowly. Every headache or dizzy moment made me think of the chirping. Nothing happened. Then, sometime during my teenage years, the sound stopped. There was no dramatic final chirp. I did not wake one morning and immediately realize it was gone. The noise simply became less frequent until one day I noticed I had not heard it in a long time. I waited for it to return. It did not. Months passed, then years. The cricket inside my head was gone. I never found out why. If the sound came from a muscle spasm, perhaps my body changed as I grew and the spasm stopped. If it was connected to ear pressure or a small structural issue, adolescence may have corrected it naturally. If it was tinnitus, the brain may have learned to filter it out until I no longer noticed it. The sound might still exist at a level I cannot consciously hear. Or maybe whatever caused it simply ended. The disappearance brought relief, but it also removed any chance of proving what happened. While the noise was active, a specialist might have recorded it or measured movement inside the ear. Once it stopped, there was nothing left to examine. All we had was the memory of my mother hearing it. Sometimes I ask myself whether she truly heard the same sound. Maybe she pressed her ear close and heard a tiny, normal body noise, like blood movement or a muscle twitch, then assumed it was the chirping I described. My fear and repeated complaints may have influenced what she expected. When she listened, any small click could have seemed important. Her pale expression may have frightened me so much that I remember it as more dramatic than it was. That is possible. People can influence one another without meaning to. But I remember that moment clearly. She did not say, "Maybe I heard something." She said she could hear it too. Her face changed because the sound was real to her. Another possibility is that the noise came from outside my ear, but only became audible at close range. A small movement of hair, skin, or wax could have created friction. Maybe my mother heard the same physical sound for a reason that was completely harmless. But no one found a visible cause. The sound continued for years, long after any temporary blockage should have cleared. It also seemed to happen inside my head even when no one else was close enough to hear it. I sometimes wonder whether modern doctors would have identified it more easily. Medical knowledge and equipment improve over time. A specialist in hearing disorders might recognize the description immediately. They might use a sensitive microphone inside the ear canal, check the movement of the eardrum, or test the middle ear muscles. Perhaps the answer has always been something simple and rare. A condition with a name, a small muscle twitching, a valve-like movement in the ear. Nothing supernatural at all. That is what I believe most of the time. The human body makes strange sounds. Joints crack, muscles click, blood moves, air shifts through narrow passages. Most of those sounds are covered by the world around us. If one happened close to the eardrum, it might sound incredibly loud to the person experiencing it. What made the event frightening was not the sound itself. It was the lack of explanation. I was a child hearing something no one believed. Then my mother heard it and became afraid. The doctor found nothing. When he could not explain it, He suggested we imagined it. The noise continued anyway. It chirped through childhood and into my teens as though it did not care what the scans said. There were nights when I lay awake listening to it and imagined something small living deep inside my head. I knew that was impossible, but the sound was insect-like enough to create the image. A tiny cricket hidden where no doctor could see. Sometimes I imagined it was counting time. The regular chirps felt almost like a signal. I wondered whether anyone else would ever hear it again. I occasionally asked my mother to listen, but I do not remember another moment as clear as the first. Perhaps the sound became quieter. Maybe she refused because the experience frightened her too much. I think the doctor's reaction affected her. Being told that both of us imagined it made her question what she heard, even though she had been certain before. That is one of the hardest parts of unexplained experiences. When an authority says nothing is there, people begin doubting their own senses. A normal scan is excellent news, but it does not always mean the symptom is unreal. It only means the test did not find the cause. At 8 or 9, I did not understand that distinction. I thought the doctor was saying I was crazy. The psychiatrist's recommendation made it feel as though complaining had become dangerous. If I continued talking about the chirping, adults might treat me as though something was wrong with my mind. So I became quieter about it. I heard the noise, but I did not always mention it. I learned to live with something no one could explain. That may be why I remember it so strongly now. The sound was not the only frightening part. The disbelief was. For a while, I was completely alone with it. Then, my mother entered that same mystery for one brief moment. She placed her ear against mine. She heard the cricket, too. Even now, I cannot decide which explanation bothers me more. If it was a physical condition, why did no doctor identify it? If it existed only inside my perception, how did my mother hear it? If we both imagined it, why did the same illusion happen at the exact same moment? There is probably a medical answer. I want to believe there is. A middle ear muscle spasm, objective tinnitus, or another harmless mechanical problem could explain almost everything. It could begin in childhood, continue for years, and stop as the body changed. The scan would look normal. Another person might hear it at close range. That seems far more likely than anything supernatural. But because no one confirmed it, the question remains open. I am older now, and the sound has been gone for years. Most of the time, I do not think about it. Then, I hear a cricket outside at night. The chirping starts in the grass or near a window, and for a second, I feel like a child again. I remember lying in bed with my hands over my ears. I remember telling people the sound was inside me. I remember everyone saying they heard nothing. Then, I remember my mother leaning close. She listened. She pulled away, with all the color gone from her face. "I can hear it too," she said. That was the first time I knew the noise was real. It was also the moment it became truly frightening. My mom and I lived in an old Victorian house beside the elementary school I had attended as a child. She had bought the place as a flip, so the plan was never to settle there permanently. We were only supposed to stay long enough for her to repair it, improve the property, and eventually sell it for a profit. At least, that was how she explained it to me. It was supposed to be a temporary inconvenience, not somewhere we would build a life. The house was large, old, and impressive from the outside, with the kind of tall windows, narrow hallways, and steep roof that made it look as though it belonged in another century. During the day, it had a certain charm. Sunlight came through the windows. and the sounds of children from the school nearby made the place feel less isolated. At night, however, it felt completely different. The rooms seemed larger after dark. The hallways looked longer, and every movement of the old wood traveled through the house. Floors creaked when no one appeared to be walking on them. Pipes knocked behind the walls. Doors shifted slightly in their frames whenever the weather changed. Because it was such an old property, there was always a normal explanation available for anything strange. That made it easy to ignore the first few incidents. The house had a finished attic that had been converted into a living space, and that was where I stayed. It was not the kind of attic filled with dusty boxes and exposed beams. Someone had turned it into a proper room, with walls, flooring, electrical outlets, shelves, and enough space for a bed and television. It felt almost like a small apartment separated from the rest of the house. At first, I liked having the privacy. I could watch movies, listen to music, and stay awake without disturbing my mom downstairs. The attic was reached by a staircase from the second floor, and once I was up there, the rest of the house felt far away. That isolation became less comfortable as time passed. During the first month, the television began turning on and off by itself. It did not happen constantly, but it happened often enough for me to notice. Sometimes I would leave the room and return to find the television playing, even though I was sure I had switched it off. Other times, I would be watching something, and the screen would suddenly go dark without anyone touching the remote. I blamed the age of the house. The wiring was old, and we were already finding repairs that needed to be done. A power surge, loose outlet, or faulty television could easily explain it. There were also times when I questioned my own memory. Maybe I had forgotten to turn it off before leaving. Maybe I had sat on the remote or pressed the button without noticing. Nothing about it was frightening enough to make me believe anything paranormal was happening. After 2 or 3 months, other things began changing in the attic. Objects were moved from where I remembered leaving them. DVDs fell or appeared to have been thrown from the shelf. Papers that had been sitting on a desk ended up scattered across the floor. My bed sometimes looked disturbed, as though someone had sat or rolled around on it while I was gone. The blankets would be pulled loose, and the pillows would no longer be where I had left them. Once again, I looked for ordinary explanations. The floor might have been uneven, allowing DVDs to slide from the shelf. Air from a vent or open window could scatter paper. The cats could have entered the attic when I was not around and jumped onto the bed. My mom might have gone upstairs looking for something and forgotten to tell me. Every incident could be explained separately, and I preferred it that way. I would clean the room, put everything back, and continue with my day. I was skeptical by nature. I did not automatically believe in ghosts, and I had no interest in turning every odd sound into a haunting. Old houses have histories, but they also have bad wiring, loose boards, rodents, drafts, and plumbing problems. I knew that. I also understood that once someone decides a house is haunted, every harmless noise begins to support the idea. I did not want to fall into that way of thinking. Even when the attic felt uncomfortable, I told myself it was only because I was sleeping far from the rest of the house. If I heard a sound on the stairs, I assumed it was one of the cats. If the television turned on, I blamed electricity. If something moved, I blamed myself. Then, one night, something happened that neither I nor the woman who is now my wife could explain. My mom was out with friends, so my girlfriend at the time and I had the house to ourselves. We were in the living room watching a movie. The layout of that part of the house is important because it affected what we heard and how we reacted. There was a wall on the left side of the living room separating it from the area near the front door. In front of us was a three-quarter wall opening toward a connecting hallway. To the right was the kitchen, which also connected to the hallway and continued toward the front entrance. The staircase to the second floor began near the front door. The house's layout formed a kind of loop, meaning someone could move between the front hall, kitchen, and living room without always being visible. At some point, we paused the movie or walked into the kitchen to get ice cream. We were standing there talking when we heard footsteps in the hallway. They were loud and heavy. The sound was not the light tapping of a cat or the soft creak of wood settling. It sounded like a person wearing heavy boots or hard high heels, walking with purpose across the floor. Each step was clear and separate. The noise came from the direction of the front hall, as though someone had entered through the main door and was moving deeper into the house. My first thought was that my mom had come home early. I called out to her. There was no answer. We waited, listening for keys, a purse being placed on a table, or some sign that another person had entered. Nothing followed. The footsteps stopped, and the house became quiet again. My girlfriend and I looked at each other, but neither of us was ready to panic. We assumed we had misheard something. Maybe the cats had knocked over an object. Perhaps a branch had struck the house, or sound from the road had carried strangely through the front rooms. We dismissed it, returned to the living room, and continued watching the movie. A few minutes later, the footsteps started again. This time, they were on the staircase. The stairs led from the area near the front door to the second floor. We could hear the steps climbing one after another, each one pressing down on the old wood. Whoever was making the sound seemed to be moving upstairs. That immediately felt wrong. Everyone in the family normally entered from the back of the house. The front door faced a busy road and was inconvenient to use. The car park was behind the property, and the outside entrance connected directly to the kitchen. My mom would have parked in the back and walked in through that door. She would not have entered from the front and silently gone upstairs without speaking to us. I called her name again. The footsteps continued. There was still no answer. At that point, I took out my phone and called my mom. She answered, and I could hear loud music and voices behind her. She was clearly still out with her friends. I asked if she had come home or whether she was somehow upstairs. She sounded confused and told me she was nowhere near the house. The moment she said that, the situation changed completely. My girlfriend had heard the call. She knew my mom was not there. We were supposed to be alone, yet someone appeared to be walking around upstairs. I ended the call and went into the kitchen. I grabbed a knife because it was the first thing available. Looking back, confronting a possible intruder with a kitchen knife was a terrible idea, but at the time, I felt responsible for checking the house. I did not know whether someone had broken in, and I could not leave without making sure there was not a person hiding upstairs. I slowly moved toward the hallway. The footsteps continued going up and down the staircase. They did not sound random. They sounded like someone climbing to the second floor, turning around, and coming back down, only to repeat the movement. The person wore something hard on their feet, creating a sharp impact against each step. I held the knife in front of me and listened. My girlfriend remained behind me, terrified. As I reached the hall, my mom's two cats suddenly came racing down the stairs. They were not calmly walking or playing with each other. They came down screaming, making sounds I had never heard from them before. Their fur was standing high along their backs, and their tails were puffed up. They ran past me as though something upstairs was chasing them. That was the moment I became certain there was a real person in the house. Cats can react to sounds people do not notice, but this was not mild curiosity. They were terrified. Whatever was happening upstairs had frightened both of them badly enough to send them running. I stepped around the corner, expecting to see an intruder on the staircase. No one was there. The steps were empty. The upper hallway beyond them looked dark and still. I stood there, holding the knife, staring at a staircase from which two panicked cats had just escaped. I yelled that whoever was inside needed to leave. I tried to sound confident, though my voice probably revealed how frightened I was. I warned that I had a weapon and that the police would be called. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, the footsteps began again. This time, they sounded as if someone were running. The noise started in the upstairs hallway. Heavy steps raced toward the top of the stairs, then charged down them directly toward me. I could hear every impact. The sound moved closer with terrifying speed. There should have been a person coming into view at any second. I raised the knife and prepared myself. Nothing appeared. The footsteps continued down the final steps and came straight toward the place where I stood, yet the staircase remained empty. There was no body, no shadow, and no movement in the air. The sound stopped almost in front of me. I had spent months explaining away the activity in the attic, but there was no explanation I could create for that. My girlfriend had heard the same footsteps. The cats had reacted to them. The sound had moved through the house as though a real person was walking, but there was no one there. We did not stay to investigate further. I called my dad, who lived only a few minutes away. He was a police officer and one of the most skeptical people I knew. I told him there might be someone inside the house. I explained that we heard footsteps upstairs and that the cats had run down in terror. My girlfriend and I left through the back entrance, got into her car, and drove a short distance down the street. We parked where we could still see the house, but were far enough away that anyone inside could not easily reach us. My dad arrived and entered the property. Because he was a police officer, he did not simply glance through a few rooms. He conducted a thorough search. He checked doors and windows, closets, the basement, the second floor, and the attic. He looked in any place where a person might hide. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing appeared to have been stolen. No stranger was inside. We waited across the street while he searched. The house looked dark and silent from the car. I remember watching the upper windows, half expecting someone to stand behind the glass. I wondered whether whatever had made the footsteps was watching my father move from room to room. Eventually, he came out and told us the house was clear. His conclusion was that no one had broken in. He did not claim the house was haunted, but he could not explain what we had heard. He may have blamed the structure, pipes, or animals, but I knew the sound of footsteps. So did my girlfriend. The cat's reaction made it even harder to dismiss. My mom returned after my dad finished searching. She saw us and immediately noticed how shaken we were. We told her everything from the first footsteps in the hallway to the sound charging down the empty staircase. She listened calmly. Her response was strange. She did not laugh, argue, or tell us we were imagining things. She simply said, "Okay, we'll deal with this later." At the time, I did not understand why she reacted with so little surprise. I expected disbelief or concern about a possible intruder. Instead, she behaved almost as though she already knew what we were describing. I refused to sleep in the house that night. I did not want to return to the attic, especially after realizing the footsteps had come from the floor directly below it. The television turning on, the scattered DVDs, the papers, and the disturbed bed no longer seemed like unrelated accidents. Something may have been entering my room for months. After the house was repaired and eventually sold, my mom sat my wife and me down and finally told us what she knew about the property. The house had a disturbing history. The people who owned it during the years when I attended the elementary school next door, roughly between 1995 and 2000, had been a married couple with an abusive relationship. According to what my mom had learned, the husband was a sexual predator who had collected thousands of illegal images of children. He kept the material in an office located in the attic, the same attic where I had been living. Eventually, his wife reported him to the police. When officers arrived at the property to arrest him, he ran into the garage and took his own life. Afterward, the house remained on the market for years. Buyers either avoided it because of the history or failed to stay. The property lost value, which was one reason my mom had been able to purchase it cheaply enough to flip. Hearing that changed the entire experience. The attic had not only been a converted living space, it had been his private office, the place where he stored the evidence of what he had done. I thought about the television switching on and off, the DVDs thrown from the shelf, the papers scattered across the floor, the bed disturbed when I returned. If there was something left in the house, it seemed especially active in the room connected to him. We began to believe the presence tormenting us was the dead husband. It was impossible to prove, of course. A terrible person dying in a house does not automatically mean his ghost remains there. The details may have influenced how we interpreted the earlier events. Once someone learns a dark history, every unexplained sound seems connected to it. But my mom had not told us the history before the night of the footsteps. My girlfriend and I heard them without expecting anything paranormal. The cats reacted before we knew what had happened in the house. My mom then admitted that she had experienced similar things whenever she was alone. She had heard movement and strange noises that she could not explain. She also described nights of sleep paralysis when she would wake unable to move and see a man standing at the foot of her bed. Sleep paralysis can cause vivid hallucinations. People commonly see shadowy figures, intruders, or threatening faces while their bodies remain asleep. There is a clear medical explanation for that experience. But after everything else, my mom believed the man she saw was connected to the house. Her calm reaction when we told her about the footsteps suddenly made sense. She had already been frightened there. She had simply chosen not to tell us, perhaps because she did not want to affect the sale or make us afraid while we were living in the property. I was angry that she had kept the history from us, but I also understood why. She had invested money in the house and needed to finish the renovation. If we knew a criminal had killed himself there and may have used the attic for horrific activity, none of us would have agreed to stay. Even without believing in ghosts, the knowledge alone would have made the house unbearable. I also wondered whether my dad had truly found nothing, or whether he had noticed details he never shared. As a police officer, he trusted physical evidence. Locked doors, intact windows, and empty rooms meant no intruder was present. He would never call invisible footsteps proof of a spirit. Still, he knew we were genuinely afraid. My wife and I rarely discuss that night now. It is not something we enjoy remembering. Whenever someone begins telling ghost stories, we sometimes look at each other. That look is enough. We both remember the kitchen, the first heavy footsteps, the phone call proving my mom was still away, and the cats screaming as they ran down the stairs. We remember the sound charging toward me while the staircase remained empty. Before that house, I considered myself a skeptic. I believed every strange experience had a rational explanation, even if people had not discovered it yet. In many cases, I still believe that. Old houses create sounds. Animals move objects. Electrical problems turn televisions on. Fear affects memory, and knowledge of a tragedy can change the way people interpret normal events. I can explain almost every individual part of what happened. The attic disturbances could have been the cats. The television could have had a faulty switch. The footsteps may have been the house settling. The cats could have been frightened by an animal in the wall. My mother's visions could have been sleep paralysis. The problem is that all of those things happened in the same house. The footsteps had direction, rhythm, and weight. They moved through the hall, climbed the stairs, and later ran directly toward me. Two people heard them. Two animals reacted. My father searched the entire property and found no one. My mom already knew the house had been active when she was alone. Then we learned that the attic where the worst activity occurred had once belonged to a deeply disturbed man who died violently on the property. Maybe those facts came together by coincidence. Maybe the house was simply old, and our minds created a story afterward. But I no longer feel as certain as I once did. I know what a person running down a staircase sounds like. I heard it coming straight toward me. I stood there with a knife raised, waiting for someone to appear. Nothing ever did. That night changed the way I think about haunted places. I no longer assume every ghost story is true, but I also no longer laugh when someone says they heard footsteps in an empty house. Sometimes a building carries more than age. Sometimes people leave something behind. And if that house held a presence, it was not harmless or confused. It was angry. It had been disturbed in the room where it once hid its secrets. And on that night, while my wife and I stood alone inside, it made sure we knew we were not the only ones there. I am not sure how much of the background matters, but I think it is important to explain everything, because the timing of what happened is a large part of why it still bothers me. My girlfriend and I had been together for close to 4 years. By that point, we knew each other extremely well. We had been through the comfortable stage of the relationship, the difficult stage, and all the ordinary arguments and problems that happen when two people have been together for a long time. Around the time this happened, we were going through a rough patch. We had not fully ended the relationship, but things between us had become uncertain. We were spending more time apart and trying to decide whether being together was still good for either of us. There was still a lot of love between us, but there was also frustration, sadness, and the feeling that neither of us knew what the right decision was. After some distance, we started hanging out again. It was not an official reunion. We were not pretending that all our problems had disappeared. We were simply spending time together and seeing how it felt. One evening, I was at her house. It was an old house, the kind that made noises even when no one was moving. Floors settled, pipes shifted, and doors sometimes seemed to move slightly in their frames. I had never seen anything clearly paranormal there. But there had always been something about the place that made me uncomfortable if I thought about it for too long. During the day, it seemed normal. At night, some of the rooms felt different. My girlfriend's bedroom was one of those places. It was not openly frightening, and I had slept there many times before without anything happening. Still, when the room was completely dark, it sometimes felt heavier than the rest of the house. That night, my girlfriend and I were lying together in her bed. She fell asleep with her head resting on my chest. Despite the problems we had been having, the moment felt familiar and peaceful. Her breathing became slow and steady, and after a while, I fell asleep too. I began dreaming that I was in my garage. The garage in the dream looked close enough to the real one that I did not immediately realize I was asleep. I remember the open space, the hard floor, and the overhead lights. Nothing especially frightening was happening at first. I was simply standing there. Then, someone whispered directly into my left ear, "Shit the bed." The voice was so close that I did not only hear it, I felt it. I felt the breath or pressure of the words against my ear, as if a person had leaned close enough for their lips to nearly touch my skin. The voice sounded male. It did not shout or speak dramatically. The phrase was delivered like a private comment, meant only for me. My entire body reacted immediately. I swung around to my left, expecting to find someone standing beside me. As I turned, the lights inside the garage changed. They dimmed. Then, they became red. The normal garage disappeared beneath a deep red glow, and the whole dream shifted from strange to threatening in a single second. The walls, floor, and everything around me seemed covered by the same dark red light. The movement of turning left in the dream continued as I woke up. I came back to consciousness and realized my head and upper body had turned to the left in real life, too. For a moment, the dream and the bedroom seemed connected. I was no longer in the garage, but I was still looking toward the left side of the room as though I expected someone to be there. The bedroom was dark. My girlfriend was still asleep on or beside me. Nothing obvious had changed. There was no red light and no man standing near the bed. Still, I could not relax. A strong feeling of fear settled over me. It was not only the normal fear that follows a nightmare. I have had bad dreams before, and usually there is a moment of relief when I wake and realize none of it was real. This was different. The room itself felt wrong. I looked around the darkness and had the sense that someone or something was still present. I could not point to a particular corner and say the feeling came from there. It seemed to fill the whole room. My mind started connecting the dream to the house. The building was old. Many people had lived in it. Things had happened there before I ever entered it, and I did not know the entire history. Once those thoughts began, they became more disturbing. I wondered whether the voice had truly been part of a dream, or whether I had heard something in the bedroom and my sleeping mind placed it inside the garage. External sounds can enter dreams. A television playing in another room might become part of a dream conversation. Someone speaking nearby can appear as a character in the dream. But the room was quiet. My girlfriend was asleep. No one else was close enough to whisper directly into my ear. I stayed in bed for a short time, looking around. I tried to convince myself to settle down and sleep again, but the feeling did not fade. The longer I remained there, the stronger my urge to leave became. I did not want to wake my girlfriend and frighten her over a ridiculous dream. The phrase itself sounded almost funny. Shit the bed was not the kind of frightening message a ghost or threatening figure would normally deliver. But the way it had been whispered was not funny. The red lights were not funny. The feeling in the room was not funny. Eventually, I carefully moved away from my girlfriend, got out of bed, and gathered my things. I left the house. I did not make a dramatic announcement or wake the entire family. I simply decided I did not want to stay there another minute. Once I was outside, the feeling began to weaken. Fresh air and distance from the bedroom helped me think more clearly. I told myself it had only been a vivid dream caused by the stress surrounding our relationship. My girlfriend and I had been going through a difficult time. I was sleeping in an emotionally complicated situation, and my mind may have turned that tension into a disturbing dream. The garage could have represented feeling trapped or uncertain. The red light could have been fear or anger. The whispered phrase may have been something I heard years earlier and forgotten. Dreams are made from pieces of memories, conversations, and random thoughts. They do not always have a deeper meaning. I tried to leave it at that. About a week later, I was talking with my girlfriend's mother. The dream came up during the conversation. I do not remember exactly why I decided to tell her, but it probably seemed like an amusing, strange story by then. I explained that I had fallen asleep in my girlfriend's bed and dreamed I was standing in my garage. Then a man leaned close to my left ear and whispered, "Shit the bed." I told her about turning around, seeing the garage lights dim and become red, and waking while physically looking to the left. At first, we laughed. The phrase sounded ridiculous when spoken aloud. It was not poetic or mysterious. It was crude and oddly specific, which made the whole dream seem less frightening in daylight. Then my girlfriend's mother became quiet. Her expression changed. She looked at me and said, "You know what's really weird about that?" I asked her what she meant. She answered, "That's something Brandon used to say a lot." The laughter stopped. I knew who Brandon was, but I had never known that phrase was connected to him. Brandon was considered my girlfriend's uncle on her mother's side of the family. I do not know whether he was technically related by blood in the exact way the title suggested, but he was close enough to the family that everyone treated him like an uncle. For a period of time, he had been estranged from them. Eventually, he came back into their lives and rebuilt the relationship. He became especially close to my girlfriend's mother. He also treated my girlfriend almost as if she were his own daughter. Their relationship was deep and important to both of them. My girlfriend trusted him. He cared about her, protected her, and made her feel loved. A few years before I met my girlfriend, Brandon began struggling with serious personal problems. I do not know every detail, and some parts of his life were probably kept private. For reasons that may never be completely understood, he eventually took his own life. The way he did it was extremely violent. I will not describe it in detail, but it was the kind of death that leaves lasting trauma for everyone connected to the person. It was not peaceful. It was not something the family could easily forget. My girlfriend continued feeling connected to him after his death. She often talked about sensing that he was watching over her. She believed he appeared during difficult moments or gave her feelings that helped guide her decisions. I had always listened, but I was skeptical. I did not tell her she was wrong, especially because the belief brought her comfort. Grief affects people in different ways, and feeling that a loved one remains nearby can help someone survive a painful loss. But I had never been sure that those feelings came from anything supernatural. People know the personalities of those they love. After a person dies, they can imagine what advice that person would give. It can feel like receiving a message, even when it comes from memory. That was how I understood my girlfriend's experiences. During the rough patch in our relationship, she had spoken about Brandon again. She told me she could feel him. According to her, she felt he was telling her that she was doing the right thing by being on her own. That was difficult for me to hear. From her point of view, someone who loved and protected her seemed to be encouraging her to step away from me and regain her independence. I did not know whether to take it seriously. Part of me saw it as her own feelings expressed through the memory of Brandon. If she believed being alone was healthier, her mind might interpret that belief as guidance from someone she trusted. Another part of me was uncomfortable with the idea that a dead man might be observing our relationship and disapproving of me. I tried not to think about it too much. Then I heard the phrase in the dream, "Shit the bed." It was something Brandon had apparently said often while he was alive. I had never heard that information before. My girlfriend had not used the phrase around me, at least not that I remembered. Her mother had never mentioned it. There was no clear reason for my mind to choose those exact words. That coincidence changed the dream. Before the conversation with her mother, it had been a random nightmare. Afterward, it felt like possible contact. I asked her mother questions. Was she sure Brandon used that phrase? How often did he say it? Could I have heard someone in the family use it without remembering? She seemed certain that it was one of his regular sayings. It may have been the kind of expression he used when something went wrong or when he wanted to make a crude joke. To her, hearing that I had been whispered those words was immediately connected to him. My first reaction was disbelief. There had to be a normal explanation. Maybe my girlfriend had said it while I was half asleep. Perhaps her mother had told a story involving Brandon and the phrase months earlier, and I had forgotten. The brain can store information without keeping a clear memory of where it came from. Later, the phrase could return during a dream and feel completely new. That process is sometimes called cryptomnesia. A person believes an idea or memory appeared from nowhere when it actually came from something heard or seen in the past. That explanation is possible. 4 years in a relationship is a long time. I had spent many hours around my girlfriend and her family. I could have heard the phrase at a gathering, during a story about Brandon, or in an old video. Maybe no one remembered telling me. The phrase could have stayed buried in my mind until the night of the dream. Stress then pulled it forward. The problem was that no one could remember ever telling me. My girlfriend's mother reacted as though the connection surprised her too. If she had told me before, she likely would not have become so quiet. I asked my girlfriend later. She also believed it was strange. For her, the dream supported what she already believed about Brandon. She felt he remained near her, especially during emotionally difficult periods. She may have seen the whisper as him making his presence known to me. But if it was a message, I still do not know what it meant. The phrase itself could be interpreted in several ways. Maybe it was only a joke. Brandon may have used humor and crude expressions often, and repeating one of his favorite lines could have been a way of proving his identity. If a spirit wanted someone to know who was speaking, an unusual personal phrase would be more effective than a general message. Anyone could whisper a name. Only someone connected to Brandon would choose words he regularly used. But the dream did not feel friendly. The lights turned red. The room felt threatening when I woke. I left because I believed something was wrong. If Brandon cared for my girlfriend like a daughter, maybe he did not want me there. Perhaps the whisper was a warning to leave her alone during the rough patch. My girlfriend believed he supported her decision to be on her own. If that belief was correct, then my presence in her bed may have felt like an intrusion. The dream could have been his way of confronting me. That interpretation frightens me more than the idea of a random ghost. A stranger's spirit would have no reason to focus on me. Brandon would. He may have believed he was protecting someone he loved. Still, the words themselves did not clearly tell me to leave. Shit the bed can mean something failed badly, or a situation became a disaster. Maybe the phrase described our relationship. Perhaps it meant we had already ruined things. Or maybe there was no hidden message at all. It could have been a personal signature. Nothing more. The red garage might have come entirely from my own fear once I felt someone near me. There is also the possibility that the whisper came from my girlfriend. People talk in their sleep. She was lying on my chest, close enough for her voice or breath to reach my ear. She may have repeated a phrase associated with Brandon while dreaming about him. I could have heard her say it and incorporated the words into my own dream. That would explain the physical feeling of someone whispering close to my ear. It would also explain why the phrase belonged to someone emotionally important to her. Maybe she dreamed about Brandon and spoke one of his expressions aloud. I asked whether she remembered dreaming or saying anything. She did not. Sleep talking often leaves no memory, so that does not rule it out. However, the whisper sounded male to me. My girlfriend's voice did not sound like what I heard. Dreams can alter voices, though. A few quiet words from her could have become a man's whisper inside the garage scene. That may be the simplest explanation. Another possibility is a hypnopompic hallucination, which can happen while a person is waking. The mind becomes conscious before dream imagery and sensations fully disappear. People may hear voices, feel touches, or see figures in the room. The whisper could have occurred during that transition. The garage lights turning red happened as I woke, and my real body completed the same leftward movement I made in the dream. That overlap strongly suggests I was caught between sleeping and waking. The bad feeling in the room may have been the emotional remains of the nightmare. This explanation accounts for the experience itself. It does not explain why the phrase matched Brandon. That part could still be coincidence or forgotten information. Coincidences can be powerful without being supernatural. Millions of words and phrases pass through our minds over a lifetime. Eventually, a dream will contain something connected to a real person or event in an unexpected way. The more unusual the match, the more meaningful it feels. Shit the bed is not an impossible phrase for someone to dream. It is a common, crude expression in some places. Maybe I had heard it from someone else. Brandon using it frequently does not mean he was the only person who ever said it. I understand all of that. I still cannot completely dismiss the connection. The timing bothers me. My girlfriend and I were struggling. She felt Brandon was encouraging her to remain on her own. Then I returned, slept beside her, and heard his familiar phrase whispered directly into my ear. I woke with a sense that the room did not want me there. A week later, without knowing what I had heard, her mother identified the phrase as something Brandon said often. If I were trying to invent a ghost story, that sequence would feel too perfectly arranged. But that is how it happened. I have wondered whether my girlfriend's emotional connection to Brandon somehow influenced the room. Maybe she had been thinking about him before sleeping. Perhaps grief, stress, and the uncertainty of our relationship created an atmosphere that affected both of us. There does not need to be a literal ghost for emotions to influence dreams. If she had recently told me she felt Brandon advising her, the idea may already have been in my mind. Even if I was not consciously thinking about it, I knew he represented protection and judgment in her life. My dream might have given that unseen presence a voice. But again, I did not know the phrase. That is the point I always return to. I can explain the whisper. I can explain the red lights. I can explain waking while turning. I can explain the fear in the old bedroom. I cannot easily explain the exact words. My relationship with my girlfriend continued to be complicated after that. The dream did not instantly decide whether we stayed together or separated. I did not begin believing every paranormal claim. I still questioned her feelings about Brandon and whether they came from grief rather than an outside presence. But I became less confident in my skepticism. Before this, I believed experiences like hers could always be explained by memory, emotion, and coincidence. Afterward, I had my own experience that seemed to include information I had never learned. I do not claim that Brandon visited me. There is no proof. A dream is not evidence of life after death. Neither is a familiar phrase, but the coincidence is too strong for me to ignore completely. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had stayed. I left because the room felt wrong. Would I have heard the whisper again? Would another dream have followed? Maybe nothing would have happened, and I would have laughed about the experience the next morning. Or perhaps leaving was the point. If something wanted me out of that room, it succeeded. I have also considered whether the message was not threatening at all. Brandon may have appeared in the only way he knew how, using a phrase that would make his family recognize him later. The red light and fear may have come from my own reaction to hearing a voice during sleep. A spirit does not necessarily control the dream around its message. My mind could have taken 2 seconds of contact and created the frightening garage scene. If that is true, the whisper itself may have been neutral or even playful. Maybe he was only making his presence known. That idea is easier to accept than believing he wanted to harm me. According to everything I heard, Brandon loved my girlfriend and wanted to protect her. Even if he disliked our relationship, he might have chosen to warn rather than attack. The phrase was disturbing because it was sudden and close, not because the words themselves threatened violence. Still, I remember the feeling when I woke. The darkness seemed occupied. I could not convince myself to stay. Even now, the memory of turning left in the dream and waking in the exact same position makes my skin crawl. It was as though the boundary between the garage and bedroom opened for one movement. Someone whispered. I turned toward him. The lights changed. Then I opened my eyes in another room, still searching for the person who had spoken. Nothing was there. A week later, I learned exactly who the words belonged to. My girlfriend's mother had no reason to lie or create the connection. Her reaction was natural. She laughed with us, then suddenly remembered something that made the story serious. You know what's really weird about that? Those words changed the memory forever. Without them, I would have forgotten the dream. It would have become one of many strange nightmares caused by stress. Instead, it remains connected to a dead man I had never met. A man who cared deeply about the woman sleeping on my chest. Maybe I once heard the phrase and forgot. Maybe my girlfriend whispered it in her sleep. Maybe stress created an unlikely coincidence. Those explanations are possible, and I still lean toward one of them most of the time. But there are other times, usually late at night, when I remember how close the voice felt. It did not seem like a sound created inside my head. It felt as though someone leaned down beside me and spoke directly into my left ear. And when I think about my girlfriend saying that Brandon wanted her to be alone, I sometimes wonder whether the dream was not random at all. Maybe he had been watching over her just as she believed. Maybe he knew I was back in her bed. And maybe, in the only way he could prove who he was, he decided to let me know that he was there.
Quick pause, then we're right back. A lot of people watch one story and leave, but some stick around. They hit subscribe and come back every night. If you want to be one of them, the button's right there. Turn on the bell too, so you never miss a new one. That's it. Let's get back to the story.
When I was around 9 or 10 years old, I had a friend come over to my house for the day. It should have been an ordinary visit. We planned to play upstairs, talk, laugh, and find ways to entertain ourselves while my mom handled things around the house. At that age, days like that usually blended together. A friend came over, we made a mess in my room, argued over toys or games, and eventually forgot most of it. This day did not fade. Even now, years later, certain parts of it remain so clear that thinking about them makes me uncomfortable. I can still picture the upstairs hallway, the open bedroom doors, my old bed, and the person I believed was my sister, walking around in the room across from mine. The strangest part is that my friend remembers seeing her too. At the time, I lived in a different bedroom from the one I use now. My old room was on the second floor, directly across the hallway from my older sister's bedroom. The layout made it easy to see into her room from mine. If I sat on my bed and looked through my open bedroom door, I could see straight across the short hallway and through her doorway. There was almost no angle between the rooms. I did not need to lean, stand, or look through a reflection. Her room was directly in front of me. If her door was open and she was walking around inside, I could see her clearly. My sister was 7 years older than me. At the time, she would have been about 17. Like many younger siblings, I had a complicated relationship with her. I looked up to her in some ways, but I was also easily annoyed by almost everything she did. She was older, had friends, used the phone often, and lived in a world that felt much more grown-up than mine. I was also, honestly, a brat when I was a child. I did not like being ignored. I complained quickly, and I had no problem telling someone to be quiet if I thought they were bothering me, even if they had every right to speak in their own room. That afternoon, my friend and I were playing on my bed. We were probably laughing, talking loudly, and doing nothing important. My mother was downstairs washing dishes. As far as I knew, she was the only other person in the house besides my friend and me. At least, that was what I thought before I looked across the hallway. I noticed my sister in her bedroom. She was pacing back and forth while speaking to someone on the phone. The sight did not seem strange at all. My sister often talked to her friends, and walking around while speaking was normal for her. She moved from one side of the bedroom to the other, holding the phone near her ear and continuing a conversation I could not fully understand. I remember exactly what she was wearing. She had on a pink t-shirt. She wore jeans. Her hair was pulled back into a ponytail. Those details have stayed with me more clearly than almost anything else from that day. I do not remember what my friend and I were playing or what the weather was like outside, but I remember the pink shirt, the jeans, and the ponytail. She looked completely solid. She did not appear transparent, pale, or ghostly. There was nothing about her face or body that made me question who I was seeing. It was my sister. I knew it as confidently as I would know my own mother standing in the kitchen. My friend could see her too. We did not stop playing in fear or ask why someone was in the other room. There was nothing frightening about the situation at first. My sister was simply home, pacing while talking on the phone. After a while, her voice began to annoy me. She seemed too loud, especially because my friend and I were trying to talk. Looking back, she probably was not making more noise than we were, but I was a child and believed everyone else should adjust to what I wanted. I looked across the hall and told her to shut up. I expected an immediate response. My sister was 17. She would never have allowed her 9 or 10-year-old sibling to speak to her like that without saying something. She would have told me to mind my business, called me annoying, or answered with some quick sarcastic comment. Instead, she continued walking. Her tone did not change. Her head did not turn. She did not even look toward me. It was as though she had not heard anything. That irritated me more. I raised my voice and told her to shut up again. She kept pacing. Her phone remained at her ear. Her mouth continued moving as though she was still having the same conversation. She did not pause for even half a second. I remember thinking she was deliberately ignoring me. At that age, I did not see her lack of response as something frightening. I thought she was being rude. Maybe she believed refusing to acknowledge me would make me more angry. It worked. I called to her again. Nothing changed. My friend was still beside me, and I assumed she was watching too. She may have found the argument funny at first. Younger children often enjoy seeing siblings annoy one another. But my sister's complete lack of reaction became strange. I was not whispering. She was directly across the hall. Even if she had been focused on the phone conversation, she should have heard me. I tried the most powerful threat I could think of at that age. I'll tell Mom. That usually got some kind of response. My sister might not have been afraid of getting in trouble, but she would at least have rolled her eyes or told me to go away. She did nothing. She did not look toward the doorway. She kept moving in the same pattern, pacing across the room as though my friend and I did not exist. That was when I decided to go downstairs. I was genuinely angry by then. My friend came with me, and we left the bedroom. I do not remember whether I looked into my sister's room as we crossed the hallway. That detail feels important now, but the memory becomes less clear around that point. I do not know whether the figure was still pacing when we stepped into the hall. I do not remember walking past the doorway and seeing her at close range. Maybe we avoided looking inside because I was focused on reaching my mother. Or perhaps the memory was lost because of what happened next. We went downstairs and found my mom washing dishes. I complained that my sister was being mean. My mother barely reacted. She was busy and probably assumed I was reporting another normal sibling argument. Without stopping what she was doing, she said something like, "Natalia, stop." She thought I was creating trouble or trying to get my sister in trouble over something small. That made me more frustrated. I told her again that my sister was upstairs being mean and talking too loudly. This time, my mom stopped. She turned and looked down at me. Her expression changed because what I had said did not make sense. Then she told me, "Natalia, she isn't home. She's camping with a friend." For a moment, I did not understand. My sister could not be camping. I had just seen her. She had been pacing in her room wearing a pink shirt and jeans, talking on the phone. My friend saw her too. I had spoken to her several times. She was upstairs. I may have tried to argue with my mother. I may have told her she was wrong. But the memory becomes almost blank after she said those words. That is one of the most disturbing parts of the experience. I have little to no recollection of what happened during the rest of the day. I do not remember whether my mother went upstairs to check. I do not remember following her. I do not remember looking into my sister's room and finding it empty. I do not remember whether my friend and I continued playing, went home early, or spent the rest of the afternoon downstairs. There should be a normal sequence after a revelation like that. My mother should have asked me exactly what I saw. We should have run upstairs. I should remember the fear of approaching the bedroom. Instead, the day seems to stop at the kitchen. My mother says my sister is camping with a friend. Then everything after that is missing or blurred. My friend also has trouble remembering the rest of the day. That makes the memory gap harder to dismiss. If I alone had forgotten, I could blame shock, time, or ordinary childhood memory. People do not remember complete days from when they were 9. But both of us remember the sighting and the conversation with my mother, yet neither of us can clearly explain what happened afterward. My mother remembers the day too. She remembers us coming downstairs and insisting that my sister was in her bedroom. She remembers telling us my sister was away camping. That confirms the basic event happened. We did not invent the story years later. At the time, however, my family did not have an explanation. My sister was not home. She had left to camp with a friend and could not have been pacing in her room. There was no reason for another person to look exactly like her and walk around inside our house. No relative had come over wearing the same clothes. No one should have been upstairs besides my friend and me. The most ordinary explanation is that we were mistaken. Maybe clothes hanging in my sister's room created the shape of a person. A coat, dress, or shadow could have moved because of air from a vent or open window. From across the hall, my child's mind may have formed that movement into my sister pacing. But that does not explain the phone conversation. I heard a female voice. I saw the figure holding something near her ear. Her mouth seemed to move. She changed position repeatedly across the room. A shadow or hanging outfit would not create such a detailed scene. Another possibility is that my sister had not actually left yet. Perhaps my mother was confused about the timing. Maybe she was preparing to go camping later and was still upstairs when we saw her. But my mother was certain she was already gone. My sister later confirmed she had been away. If she had been home, she would remember me shouting across the hall and threatening to tell Mom. She does not. There is also the possibility that someone else entered the house. A teenage friend of my sister might have come in without my mother noticing. From a distance, a girl with a ponytail and similar clothes could have looked like my sister. Maybe she ignored me because she did not know I was speaking to her. But why would a stranger be pacing inside my sister's bedroom? How would she enter and leave without anyone noticing? My friend and I would have passed close to the room when going downstairs. My mother was on the first floor near the main living areas. No visitor was ever found. And I did not only recognize the clothing, I recognized the person. It was my sister's face, body, and way of moving. Children can be confidently wrong, of course. We see what we expect to see. Still, my friend also believed it was her. The fact that two people saw the same figure makes a private visual mistake less likely. Maybe my friend did not originally see as much as I did. Perhaps she only saw movement, then accepted my statement that it was my sister. Over time, hearing the story could have changed her memory until she also pictured the pink shirt, jeans, and ponytail. Shared memories can influence each other. That was the explanation I leaned toward for years. I assumed my friend had forgotten the incident completely. We did not talk about it much as we grew older, and the memory became something I carried privately. Then, on my 16th birthday, she brought it up. We were talking, celebrating, and thinking about old memories when she briefly mentioned the day we saw my sister upstairs even though she was not home. My heart dropped. She had remembered it without me reminding her. The way she referred to it showed that it had remained in her mind, too. This was not a story I had repeatedly told her until she accepted it. Years had passed, yet she knew exactly which day I meant. We did not continue the conversation for long. The memory made both of us uncomfortable. We quickly changed the subject. I think part of us was afraid that discussing it too deeply would make it feel present again. Her confirmation removed one of my easiest explanations. I could no longer tell myself I was the only person who saw the figure and that everyone else remembered only my reaction. My friend saw her. My mother remembered our report. My sister was not home. The experience resembles stories of doppelgangers. A doppelganger is usually described as an exact copy of a living person appearing somewhere the real person is not. In some traditions, seeing one is considered a warning or bad omen. In other stories, the double behaves like an ordinary person, but ignores anyone who tries to interact with it. I did not know any of that when I was 9 or 10. To me, it was simply my sister being rude. That lack of fear at the beginning makes the memory feel especially real. I was not searching for a ghost. I did not wake from a nightmare. It was daytime, my friend was beside me, and my mother was downstairs. The house felt safe. I saw my older sister and reacted exactly as I normally would. Only later did the situation become impossible. The figure's behavior matches what bothers me most in doppelganger stories. It looked correct, but did not interact correctly. My sister should have responded to me. The copy did not. It continued the phone conversation without changing its rhythm, almost like a recording repeating the appearance of normal behavior. Maybe there was no person on the other end of the phone. Perhaps there was no real conversation at all. The figure might only have been moving its mouth and holding its hand near its head because that was an activity associated with my sister. It looked like her, but it did not understand the situation around it. That thought is much more frightening than seeing a transparent ghost. A ghost at least looks dead or unnatural. This figure looked completely alive. Only its behavior revealed something was wrong. I have wondered whether it was replaying a moment that had happened before. Maybe my sister had paced in that room while wearing the same outfit and speaking on the phone on another day. The house somehow repeated the image after she left. Some people believe locations can hold imprints of ordinary or emotional events, almost like recordings. If that is true, my friend and I may have witnessed a scene from the past. The figure ignored me because it was not aware of the present. It only repeated what my sister had previously done. That explanation would make the event more like a residual haunting than an intelligent copy. But why would such an ordinary moment be recorded? Nothing tragic happened while she spoke on the phone, as far as I know. And if it was an image from the past, why was it so solid and clear that two children believed she was physically present? Another possibility is that it was some kind of future glimpse. Maybe my sister later wore that exact outfit and paced in her room while speaking to a friend. My friend and I could have seen a moment before it happened. There are stories of people seeing someone arrive minutes before the real person enters, or hearing familiar footsteps before a family member comes home. But I have never confirmed whether my sister wore the pink shirt and jeans after the camping trip. Even if she did, that would be difficult to prove now. Memory could connect common clothing to almost any day. The figure may also have been connected to my sister rather than the house. Some people report seeing doubles of relatives shortly before that person becomes sick, injured, or emotionally distressed. My sister was camping, and I do not remember anything bad happening to her during the trip. She returned safely. There was no death or accident connected to the sighting. That makes the traditional omen interpretation less likely. Still, the experience deeply disturbed her when I eventually told her. She does not like talking about the idea that something identical to her was walking around her bedroom while she was miles away. I understand why. It would be frightening to imagine your family interacting with a copy of you in your own home. I sometimes wonder whether the figure wanted to be seen. It paced directly within our line of sight. The bedroom door was open. It stayed visible even after I shouted. If it had wanted to pass unnoticed, it could have moved away from the doorway. Instead, it continued until I became angry enough to go downstairs. Maybe the purpose was to send me to my mother. Maybe whatever happened next is the reason our memories fail. That thought makes the missing part of the day more frightening. What did my mother find when she went upstairs? Did the figure remain there? Did it disappear before we returned? Did something happen that none of us wanted to remember? There is no evidence of anything dramatic. My mother remembers the basic conversation, but not some hidden, terrifying event afterward. The rest of the day may be missing, simply because it was normal and unimportant. We probably went upstairs, found the room empty, and continued playing after my mother told us we imagined it. Children's memories often preserve the shocking moment while discarding everything around it. My friend and I may not remember the afternoon because there was nothing else worth remembering. That is the logical answer. But the sudden blankness feels wrong. The memory does not fade gradually. It seems to end. I can picture my mother standing near the sink. I hear her tell me my sister is camping. I remember the shock. Then there is almost nothing. Anxiety can affect memory. The brain sometimes fails to store details during moments of intense fear. Maybe that is all it was. My friend and I became frightened, and the rest of the day turned into a blur. I have also considered whether the experience was some kind of shared dream or altered state. Perhaps we had been tired and fell asleep while playing on the bed. We may have dreamed the figure together through conversation, then gone downstairs after waking. But shared dreams do not usually match so closely, and my mother remembers us reporting the event during the day. There was no evidence that we had slept. A gas leak or environmental issue could cause confusion and hallucinations. Carbon monoxide can affect multiple people in a house, but my mother was downstairs and did not experience anything unusual. We had no other symptoms like headache, dizziness, or sickness that I remember. The figure was the only strange thing. Sometimes I return to the exact image of my sister. She walks from one side of the bedroom to the other. The pink shirt moves naturally with her body. Her ponytail rests behind her head. She holds the phone to her ear. Her voice carries across the hallway. I tell her to shut up. She does not look at me. That is the moment when the memory feels wrong. If it were a ghostly vision, I would expect the figure to disappear or react strangely. Instead, it continues. It behaves like a video with no awareness of the viewers. My irritation delayed the fear because I believed I understood what I was seeing. Only when my mother corrected me did every ignored call become disturbing. My sister had not been choosing not to answer. The thing upstairs may not have been capable of answering. I have tried asking my mother more about the day. Her memory is similar to mine in some ways. She remembers that my friend and I came downstairs and said my sister was upstairs. She remembers telling us that was impossible because my sister was camping. She cannot explain what we saw. She may have checked the room and found nothing, though the details are no longer clear. My friend's memory also confirms the main parts without solving anything. She saw my sister. She knew my sister was not home. She remembers the day years later. That is all. My sister has heard the story, but it frightens her so much that we usually avoid the subject. She has no memory of sensing anything unusual while camping. She did not feel as though someone were copying her. She did not dream about home. As far as she knew, she spent an ordinary day away with a friend while a version of her walked around her bedroom. Sometimes I wonder whether the copy was visible only from my room. If we had entered the hallway, would the bedroom have been empty? Maybe it was connected to the angle between the two doorways, like an image or reflection. There may have been a mirror, window, or polished surface that created an illusion. Could we have been seeing a reflection from another part of the house? The layout was direct, and I knew the room well. There was no television showing my sister or large mirror positioned to create a full moving image. Even if there were, it would not explain the voice. The figure seemed physically inside the room. Another thought is that we saw someone through a window beyond the room. Maybe a teenage girl outside lined up with the doorway and appeared to be inside. But the bedroom was on the second floor. No one could pace at that height outside without standing on a roof or raised structure. The movement followed the room's interior. She was not beyond the house. I do not have a final explanation. The older I become, the less comfortable I am calling it a simple childhood mistake. Children misidentify shadows, but two children saw the same detailed person. Children misunderstand schedules, but my sister and mother confirmed she was away. Memories change, but my friend independently mentioned the event years later. Something happened. Whether it was paranormal, psychological, or an unusual visual illusion, I do not know. I only know that I saw my sister in a place where she could not have been. She looked completely real. That may be what frightened me most after I understood. There was no warning, no transparent skin, no glowing eyes, no unnatural body. If she had responded when I shouted, I might have walked into her room. I might have stood beside her. I might have reached out and touched her. Sometimes I think about that possibility. What would have happened if I had crossed the hallway instead of going downstairs? Would the figure have disappeared as I entered? Would it have turned toward me? Would it have continued pacing as though I were not there? Or would it finally have stopped pretending to be my sister? I am glad I chose to tell my mother instead. For years, I tried to believe the memory belonged only to me. Then, my friend mentioned it on my 16th birthday. She did not need help remembering. She knew exactly what we had seen. My heart dropped because her memory confirmed that I was not alone in mine. We changed the subject quickly, and we rarely discuss it now. My sister does not like hearing about it. My mother cannot explain it. My friend remembers it, but does not want to stay with the subject. I still get chills whenever I picture that room across the hall. The open doorway, the pink shirt, the ponytail, the phone held against her ear, my voice calling out again and again while she continued pacing. For a few minutes, I believed my sister was ignoring me. The truth was worse. My sister was not in the house. Whatever was walking around her bedroom had simply looked exactly like her. Or 2008, when I was staying overnight at my best friend's house. His parents were divorced, and they each had their own place, so sometimes we stayed with his mother and other times with his dad. On this particular night, we were at his dad's house, which stood in one of the older neighborhoods in the area. The house itself was old and a little dated, but it was comfortable. It had the kind of worn-in feeling that older family homes sometimes have. The furniture did not match perfectly. The floors made small noises when people walked across them, and the rooms looked as though they had not been renovated for many years. Still, it felt warm and familiar rather than frightening. I had stayed there before, and nothing unusual had ever happened. The neighborhood was equally old. Most of the houses had been built close to the road, with small front gardens, porches, and mature trees along the street. At night, it became extremely quiet. There was not much traffic, especially after midnight, and there were no businesses nearby that stayed open late enough to bring people into the area. Our routine during sleepovers was always about the same. We would play video games for hours, eat junk food, drink too much soda, and talk about anything that came into our heads. We were young enough that staying awake past midnight still felt like we were doing something exciting, even though all we were really doing was sitting in a bedroom surrounded by empty snack bags and game controllers. That night was no different. We played games until around 1 in the morning and eventually decided we were tired enough to stop. We turned everything off, settled into the room, and tried to sleep. We almost never fell asleep immediately. Once the television and games were off, we would usually spend another hour talking in the darkness. Those conversations could go anywhere. Sometimes we talked about school or people we knew. Other times we discussed what we wanted to do with our lives, where we might live when we were older, or what the future would look like. We also liked strange theories. We talked about ghosts, secret government projects, the end of the world, and things we had seen in movies or read online. Most of it was not serious. We were entertaining ourselves and seeing who could come up with the craziest idea. That night, the conversation turned to aliens. We started discussing whether intelligent life existed somewhere else in the universe. We talked about how large space was and how unlikely it seemed that Earth could be the only planet with life. We wondered whether aliens had already visited, whether governments knew about them, and whether ordinary people might see things they could not explain. There was nothing frightening about the conversation at first. We were lying in the dark, half joking and half serious, imagining what extraterrestrial life might look like. The bedroom window faced the street, and the curtains or blinds were open enough for us to see the darkness outside. Then, a bright blue flash filled the window. The entire room lit up for a second. It happened so suddenly that both of us stopped speaking. We turned toward the window, then looked at each other. The fuck was that? Neither of us had an answer. The flash had been too bright to ignore. It was not a small light passing across the ceiling or a reflection from a distant television. It had illuminated the window and part of the bedroom with a sharp blue glow. Our first thought was that a car had driven past. Headlights can sweep across a room, especially when a vehicle turns at the end of a street. Sometimes, emergency vehicles produce blue flashes that reflect from windows before you hear the siren. But there had been no engine sound. No car passed in front of the house. From my friend's bedroom, we had a direct line of sight to the street. If a vehicle had driven by, we should have seen it. We waited and listened. The neighborhood remained silent. There were no sirens in the distance. No doors opened. No footsteps moved outside. We started discussing possible explanations, but before we could settle on one, the blue flash happened again. This time, it was brighter. The light filled the window so strongly that we could see the shape of the room for a moment. The walls, furniture, and everything around us seemed washed in an unnatural blue color. We sat up immediately. Neither of us was laughing anymore. We moved closer to the window and looked outside. The street appeared empty. There were no cars parked with their headlights on, and no vehicles moving through the neighborhood. No plane was passing overhead. We could not hear a helicopter, and there was no storm. The sky looked calm. If lightning had caused the flash, we should have heard thunder at some point. The color also seemed wrong. Lightning can appear blue or white, but this did not seem to come from the sky. It looked closer. The light felt as though it came from somewhere near the houses. We kept watching. At first, nothing happened. The street remained dark beneath the weak glow of the streetlights. The neighbors' houses were quiet, and most of their windows were black. Then, the blue light appeared again. This time, it was across the street near the neighbor's house. It did not flash and disappear. It hovered. A bright blue light was suspended in front of one of the neighbor's windows. I cannot remember its exact size with complete confidence. It may have been as small as a basketball or much larger. At night, with no clear object behind it, it was difficult to judge distance and scale. What I do remember is the color. It was an intense blue, brighter than any ordinary porch light or lamp. It did not look like a light bulb attached to the house. It looked separate, as though it was floating in the air. There was no visible object holding it, no wires, no person standing beneath it. It simply remained in front of the window. My friend and I stared at it without knowing what to say. We had just been talking about aliens, which made the timing feel almost ridiculous. If this had happened while we were discussing anything else, we might have immediately blamed an electrical problem or a neighbor playing with a flashlight. Because of the conversation, our minds went directly to something unexplained. Still, we tried to remain logical. Maybe someone in the neighbor's house was shining a blue light against the glass. A television could have created a strong glow. A police car might have been parked somewhere out of sight, with its emergency lights reflecting from the window. But the light did not spread across the glass the way a reflection normally would. It seemed to have a position in the air. It hovered in front of the house rather than appearing flat against it. It also remained steady. There was no flickering pattern, no movement from a person holding a torch, and no changing colors. Only a bright blue glow suspended outside. It stayed there for what felt like several minutes. That was long enough for us to look carefully, question each other, and make sure we were seeing the same thing. I asked my friend whether he saw it in front of the window or inside the room. He said it looked outside to him, too. We watched for a shadow or a person to pass behind it. Nothing did. There was no sound. That silence made the sight more disturbing. Something bright enough to light part of the street should have made some kind of noise if it were a machine. A drone would have buzzed. A vehicle would have had an engine. Electrical equipment might have hummed or cracked. The light was completely quiet. Then it vanished. It did not shoot away. It did not fade slowly. One moment, it hovered in front of the neighbor's window. The next, it was gone. My friend and I remained at the window, staring at the empty space. We were frightened, but we were also extremely curious. Neither of us wanted to look away in case it came back. We debated whether to wake his father. The problem was that we had no idea what we would tell him. A strange blue light had flashed through the bedroom and then floated outside a neighbor's house. By the time he came into the room, there might be nothing to see. We also did not want to be laughed at or told we had imagined it because we had stayed awake too long. So we waited. For around 30 minutes, nothing happened. We remained awake, watching the street and discussing possibilities in quiet voices. Maybe it had been ball lightning. We had heard of rare glowing spheres appearing during storms, though there had been no storm that night. Ball lightning is often described as floating, glowing, and disappearing suddenly. The color can vary, and some reports describe blue or white light. That explanation seemed possible until we remembered the first two flashes. Had the light been moving between the houses? Maybe it had appeared close to our window, then crossed the street. Perhaps the flashes were caused when it moved too quickly for us to see its full shape. We also considered an electrical transformer. A damaged transformer can produce an intense blue flash. If power equipment across the street was failing, that could explain the color. But there had been no explosion. The lights in the house never went out. There was no buzzing, smoke, or fire. A transformer would not hover silently in front of a window for several minutes. We thought about a powerful flashlight. Someone could have been playing a prank, shining a blue filtered light toward the houses. But the street was empty, and the light seemed too concentrated. It did not move like a beam controlled by a person's hand. After half an hour with no further activity, we began thinking it was over. We were still nervous, but tiredness started returning. We may have moved away from the window slightly or tried to settle back down. Then the blue light appeared again. This time it was in the middle of the street. It did not simply flash. It moved. The glowing light slowly traveled down the center of the road. It stayed low, though I cannot say exactly how high above the ground it was. It may have been several feet in the air, or close enough to the street to seem almost level with a person's head. The movement was smooth. It did not bounce like a flashlight carried by someone walking. It did not drift unpredictably like a balloon caught in the wind. It moved in a controlled, steady direction along the road. My friend and I pressed closer to the window. We watched it travel past the houses. There was still no visible object connected to it. No vehicle drove beneath it. No person followed. It was only the blue light, moving alone down the middle of the empty street at 1 in the morning. The longer we watched, the less human it seemed. If it was a person with a light, we should have seen a body at some point. The blue glow was bright enough that it should have illuminated whoever carried it. But nothing appeared inside the light. There were no legs beneath it, no hands around it, no shadow following behind. It moved as though it did not need anything to carry it. We could not hear a motor. The neighborhood remained completely quiet. We followed it with our eyes as it moved toward the far end of the street. The light did not speed up or slow down. It continued at the same steady pace until it reached the end of the road. Then it sank into the ground. That is the only way I can describe it. It did not switch off while hovering. It did not pass behind a tree, car, or building. The light moved downward and disappeared below the level of the street, as though it had entered the earth. My friend and I stared at the place where it vanished. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. There was no hole, drain, or underground entrance visible from where we were. Even if there had been a dip in the road, the light would still have needed a physical source. Instead, it looked like a glowing object had simply traveled into the ground. After that, we were both completely awake. Whatever chance we had of sleeping normally was gone. We spent the rest of the night discussing what we had seen. The alien conversation now felt much less funny. We wondered whether the light had somehow reacted to us talking about extraterrestrial life. Logically, that made no sense. A floating object outside could not know what two teenagers were discussing inside a bedroom. Still, the timing was difficult to ignore. We had been lying there wondering whether aliens were real when the first blue flash appeared. It felt like an answer. Maybe that interpretation was only created by fear. If we had been talking about ghosts, we might have thought the light was a spirit. If we had been discussing weather, we would have called it lightning. The conversation shaped the meaning we gave the event. But it did not create the light. Both of us saw it. We described the same movement, color, and disappearance. We were not asleep. We had been talking continuously before the first flash, and the event kept us awake for hours afterward. There was no moment when either of us believed we had dreamed it. The next morning, the street looked completely normal. There was no sign of damage where the light had vanished. No burned patch, broken pavement, or unusual object lay at the end of the road. The neighbor's house looked ordinary in daylight. We may have checked the window where the light hovered, but there was nothing attached to it, and no visible blue lamp. No one came outside talking about strange activity from the night before. If the neighbors saw the light, they never told us. We considered asking them, but the idea felt embarrassing. We would have sounded like two kids who stayed up too late discussing aliens and frightened themselves with a reflection. I do not remember whether we told my friend's father immediately. If we did, he did not give us an explanation that stayed with me. Adults often dismiss strange childhood experiences because they were not present to see them. He may have blamed headlights, a police vehicle, or someone with a flashlight. But there had been no car. The street was directly visible from the window, and both of us were watching carefully by the time the light traveled down it. A police vehicle would have been impossible to miss. Its lights would have flashed in a repeating pattern, and the car itself would have moved along the road. This was one continuous blue glow. Another possible explanation is a drone. Today, drones are common enough that a hovering light outside a window would be easy to explain. A small drone with bright LEDs could move down a street, remain in one place, and disappear behind an obstacle. But this happened in 2007 or 2008. Consumer drones existed, but they were far less common, especially in an older residential neighborhood at 1 in the morning. They were also noisy. A drone close enough to hover near a neighbor's window should have produced an obvious buzzing sound. We heard nothing. A remote-controlled helicopter might have created a similar effect, but again, there was no sound and no visible body. The light also seemed too bright to come from a small toy. It illuminated the area around it without revealing any machine inside. A weather balloon or floating lantern is another possibility. A lantern can drift silently and glow brightly, but it would usually appear orange or yellow, not intense blue. It would move with the wind rather than travel in a straight, controlled path down the center of a road. It would not hover in front of a window for minutes and then sink directly into the ground. A blue balloon with a light attached could behave strangely if caught in air currents, but the movement we saw looked deliberate. Maybe it only seemed controlled because of our viewing angle. Distance and darkness can make random motion appear smooth. Still, the light followed the street itself, as if using the road. We also considered reflections. The glass in the window could reflect light from inside the bedroom, making an object appear outside when it was actually behind us. But the room was dark. The television and video games were off. There was no blue light inside that could create the image. The first flashes illuminated the room from outside. We saw the glow on the neighbor's house and moving along the street, which would not happen with a simple reflection. The possibility of ball lightning continued to interest me as I became older. It is one of the few natural phenomena that can involve floating balls of light behaving in ways that seem impossible. Reports describe lights entering houses, moving through the air, hovering, and vanishing suddenly. Some people say they saw ball lightning travel close to the ground. Others describe it as blue. The problem is that ball lightning is usually associated with thunderstorms or strong electrical activity. The night was calm. There was no rain, thunder, or wind that I remember. Even if ball lightning explained the floating glow, seeing it multiple times over more than half an hour would be unusual. The light appeared near our window, then across the street, vanished, and later returned in the road. That pattern felt less like a natural electrical event and more like something moving through the neighborhood. I have also thought about an electrical arc traveling along underground cables. A fault in the power system could produce blue light, especially near the street where electrical lines might run below the ground. The final disappearance into the earth could have happened near a utility access point, but an electrical fault moving openly through the air would likely cause explosions, power loss, or damage. There would have been sound. The light would not hover in front of a second-floor window. Nothing in the neighborhood seemed affected the next day. There is, of course, the paranormal explanation. Some people report seeing ghost lights, will-o'-the-wisps, or unexplained glowing orbs. These lights are sometimes connected to old roads, graveyards, swamps, or places where someone died. They may hover, follow people, or disappear into the ground. I do not know the history of the neighborhood well enough to say whether anything happened there. The houses were old and many families had lived in them. The ground beneath the street may have existed as a field, path, or something else long before the neighborhood was built. Maybe the light was connected to the land. Maybe it followed a route that no longer existed. That idea would explain why it traveled down the center of the street and sank into the earth. It may not have been following the modern road at all. It could have been moving along an older path beneath it. That is only speculation. The alien explanation is equally impossible to prove. The light could have been a probe, some small device observing the neighborhood. Its movement appeared controlled, and it did not behave like any aircraft we recognized. Perhaps the first flashes happened when it approached the house. It then hovered near the neighbor's window as though looking inside. Later, it traveled down the road and entered an underground location. The fact that we were discussing aliens before it appeared makes that theory tempting, but there is no real evidence connecting the two. We saw no craft, beings, or physical object, only light. My friend and I continued talking about the experience long after that night. Our memories remained consistent. Neither of us later admitted to playing a prank or mistaking something obvious. We both remembered the first blue flash. We remembered the second, brighter one. We remembered the light hovering across the street. And we remembered it moving down the middle of the road before sinking into the ground. That shared memory is why I trust that something real happened. People can misidentify real objects together. We may be completely wrong about what the light was. But we did not invent it. If I had been alone, I might have convinced myself I fell asleep during our conversation. I might have called the blue light part of a dream. Instead, my friend reacted at the same moment. He saw the room light up. He watched the street beside me. We questioned each other while the light was still visible. Years have passed, and I have never seen anything like it again. I have seen emergency lights reflected from windows. I have watched drones at night. I have seen transformers explode, distant lightning, fireworks, aircraft, and strange reflections. None of them looked like the blue light from that street. The closest comparisons explain only one part. A transformer can create the color, but not the movement. A drone can hover and travel, but not remain silent or appear to sink into solid ground. Ball lightning can behave unpredictably, but usually appears during storms. A flashlight can shine through a window, but requires someone to hold it. Every explanation solves one detail and fails on the others. The part I remember most clearly is the way the light moved at the end. It did not rush away as if it had been discovered. It did not flicker weakly and die. It traveled slowly down the road, almost calmly, while two people watched from a bedroom window. Then it reached the end and lowered itself into the ground. It behaved as if that was exactly where it intended to go. We did not sleep much after that. We stayed awake trying to explain it, repeating the details so neither of us could later claim we had misunderstood. The old house made its usual sounds around us, but every creak now felt connected to what was outside. We kept checking the window, expecting the blue glow to return. It never did. By morning, the event was over. The street was ordinary again. People woke, cars began moving, and daylight erased every trace of the strange thing that had traveled through the neighborhood. I still do not know what we saw. I cannot say it was alien, supernatural, or even truly unexplained in a scientific sense. There may be a rare electrical or atmospheric explanation I have never learned. What I know is that it was not a dream. My friend and I were both awake. There were no vehicles on the street and no planes above us. The light was bright enough to illuminate the bedroom. It hovered in front of the neighbor's window for several minutes. Then, after disappearing for around half an hour, it returned and traveled alone down the road. I can still picture that blue glow moving through the darkness. It reached the end of the street, lowered toward the ground, and vanished beneath it. We had spent the night discussing whether there might be life beyond Earth. Then something appeared outside the window that neither of us could identify. Maybe the timing meant nothing. Maybe it was only a coincidence. But even now, whenever I think about the possibility of something unknown watching us from the darkness, I remember that bedroom. I remember the first blue flash, and I remember the silent light hovering across the street as though it had stopped to look inside.
So that's where we'll stop tonight. Before you go, remember this. Every story you just heard was real. Real people, real nights, and none of them saw it coming. If that got to you the way it gets to most people, do one thing before you leave. Hit subscribe. I post new stories all the time, and I don't want you to miss them. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.